Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of Upturn, the podcast where we dive deep into the roller coaster journeys of startup founders and early employees, unraveling their pitfalls and discovering how to pivot to success. Here today we have Gilbert and Carrie and Tian. And my name is Kevin and I'll be the host today, and I'm really excited to be here today to have some learning from experienced entrepreneurs who had actually 3 exits, 2 IPOs and 1 acquisition. So let's hear it from Gilbert for a quick introduction, and then we'll dive deep into how those startup journeys can upturn into success.
Well, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Glad to be with you all. I would say my journey into being an entrepreneur was not something I had planned. It's not something that I even actually wanted to do. When people said, do you want to help start a company? I would say no. So anyway, but I would say that starting very early, I was exposed to many entrepreneurs. So when I grew up, I was first born in Hong Kong. I came here when I was young, so got the benefits of a public education. For those who know San Francisco, I went to Lowell, then I went to Cal, so got the immigrant's dream education. So very high quality at a very low price. So that was the right combination. And when I was growing up, my uncle started one of the early dim sum restaurants in Chinatown. And my exposure was because one summer, my father said, what are you doing this summer? So I want to hang out with my friends, play ball, ride my bike, and do things like that. He says, well, actually you can do something different. So I would describe it as indentured servitude. But basically he volunteered me that you're going to help your uncle with this restaurant because his daughter's too young and no one else is old enough. So then I worked, but I saw how hard it was to be an entrepreneur, how hard it was to start a business, and how hard it was to just get your name known, to build a reputation. But he was quite successful. And so I also was involved in a church where my friend Kenneth Young, he was involved in starting a business later on, which is now the Prince of Peace. And so these are some of his products here. And as a result, because of that, he's been quite successful, but that's because he was able to translate his values, his faith, and his beliefs into the company that he's running today. So, so hats off to just exposing myself to people who have, just maybe not startup, but entrepreneurial spirit. So when I went to school at Berkeley, I studied EECS when no one knew what EECS was, and very few people were in computer science. And in fact, I majored in software even though I hadn't done any programming. Unlike now, a lot of people go into school and study programming because they've done some programming. I decided to go to programming because I talked to a friend who who was working on a PhD, and she said, you should do that. So I said, okay, I'll try that. And so, but I also discovered during school that coding did not come naturally to me. So my classmates were like probably 10 times better at coding and only spent half the time. So I knew that I was on the wrong side of that equation. So when I was being interviewed when I got out of college, I told the recruiter, I said, I want to use my technical skills and work with people. But I had no idea what that meant. And so he ended up being my first manager. So he offered me a job as a support engineer, doing pre and post sales support. So it was at a company involved in mainframes called Control Data. And for the people like me, we know a little bit about mainframes because that's where the term debug came from. Because in the old days, bugs would appear inside, literally inside the mainframes. So debugging meant getting rid of the bugs.
That's so original.
But I don't talk about that much because it makes people think I'm too old. But after that, I moved into a startup, Tan Computers. It was one of the early successful Kleiner Perkins startups. So, and it was my first exposure and taste of how you could make money through stock options. So I didn't know a lot about it. At that point, he granted every employee 100 shares of stock a year. So that's how I got involved with that. And then I had, when I started, I had some, the typical higher on options. And so I did make some money then, but I got intrigued by that as a vehicle for building wealth and for basically converting your hard work into equity and paying off financially. So I was recruited from there to work for a software company. And back then, software is only most people who did software were part of a hardware company. So there are very few independent software vendors. So Informix software competed against Oracle, and so I worked in product marketing. So when I was at Tandem and Control Day, I was doing support. So my career arc has gone from support to marketing to engineering. I'll talk more about engineering later, but that's a very usual arc, and it's usually the other way around.
Right.
But I've never been one to follow the same pattern. So at Informix, I was head of a marketing group, was ultimately promoted to be VP of product marketing, and during that time, it was already public, so we basically did an acquisition. It went poorly, the stock price went down to really low, but then we were able to turn it around, so we did make some money, but it was my first exposure as a vice president and officer at a publicly held company. So that was an interesting experience. So after that, I left there to work at a company called Legato. It was software only. I joined them in about September of 1 year, and 8 months later we went public.
Wow.
And that was my first experience because I was basically a hired gun. I was brought in because I didn't know this at the time. The CEO said, well, we need someone who has this experience. Oh, okay, I'll come in. And I had technical support, product marketing, and engineering report to me. And the reason why, later on, 6 months later, I found that the reason why I was hired was because CEO was tired of arbitrating between those three groups, right? Because the QA, the tech support people say, we only want releases that fix bugs. We don't want any more new features. The engineers say, we just want to push this out and put it out the door. And the marketing people say, you just need to do it yesterday, you just move faster. So that was where the tension was, and the CEO didn't want to deal with that. So he said, oh, I'm going to hire somebody whose job it is
Deal with it.
is to deal with it. So that's why I came, but he didn't say any of this. I only found out later on that they weren't getting along, and so my job was to have them get along. So we did go public. I had no idea what a roadshow was, had no idea what due diligence was, and so I learned a lot during that time. And when I left there after a couple of years, I went to another software startup. It was funded by Sutter Hill, Trinity Ventures, Greylock, so pretty good high-end VCs. And we went through the roller coaster of we were going public during the dot-com era. We stopped our roadshow in the middle and then finished pricing, and then everything started. So before the lockup period was through, our stock was coming down and down and down. So the VCs and investment bankers made money, but we did not, because it didn't. Because we were still locked up when it was coming down.
Was it 6 months or 1 year?
6 months, 6 months
Yeah,
lockup.
lock period, yeah.
So that's when it was like, it was coming down. So anyway, that's what happened. So then, the last company I was with was called Velocity 11. It did hardware, software. It was kind of before IoT was a name, it did IoT. So we had controllers, we had sensors, we had software and firmware. So we did all those things. And it was in the biopharma, high-speed drug discovery. And so that company, we grew it to a size where Agilent was interested in buying it. So they bought it for about $100 million. So that was a good exit for the investors and for some of the employees. So that's one side of, so I talk a little about education and immigration and early career. And then the last 15 years have been very different because my wife and I, we started dating in high school. We got married after college. But we did not start a family until much later. And so our kids were, as a result, when we were older, they were younger. And in 2006, my wife got sick. So she ended up battling ovarian cancer for about a year, and then she died after a year. So at that point, I was VP of engineering at a startup. I'd taken the summer off, and so I said, well, I should go back to work. But if I go back to work, then I outsource everything. So someone has to take care of the kids, someone has to pick them up from school, someone has to be around, because I work in a startup. So I get home at about 7 or 8 every night. And so I call it the Bed, Bath, and Beyond dad, right? I come home, I give him a bath, I put him to bed, and then I can, spend time with my wife. So my son, a year after my wife passed away, I said, well, 2 years later, I said, how come you weren't very cooperative? Well, cooperative is the euphemism for how come you didn't listen to me? right? How come you weren't cooperative? He said, because I didn't know you, which was really true. So it spent, so I didn't realize that was a piece of the equation. So at that point, when my wife passed away, my kids were 5 and 12. And so I basically said, okay, I'm going to stop working for a little while and just raise them and take care of, being around the house and being available. Because our strategy was we wanted to have one parent at home at all times. So I did that. I thought, maybe a couple months, maybe a year. Turned out to be 12 years when I stayed. So then about 9 years into it, a friend of mine, I literally ran into her at the San Mateo Public Library, where she said, "What are you doing?" So we talked a little bit, and she said, "Oh, I'm starting a company." In fact, she was trying new people out. So she had a meeting, a strategy meeting. She was, she had her team. She said, "Well, I don't know if these are the right people, right? Because that's what you want to do. You want to see how the chemistry is, how the thinking is." But no. So she ran into me. She said, "Oh," in the back of her mind, she said, "I want to work with you again. I'd like to see what you're doing." So let's have coffee. So I had coffee with her, and she says, "Well, here's what I want to do." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Do you want to be involved? You could be a advisor. You could be an employee. You can be a contractor. You could be co-founder. What do you want to do?" And I'm the kind of person, I don't go halfway, and it's all in or not at all.
Yes.
And so I said, "Okay, this is what I'm interested in, but this is not the right kind of setup for me, because I'm usually the second, third, or fourth VP of engineering. I'm never the first one, because my job is to come in and fix problems, right? So if you have tech debt,
1 to 100, 1,000 person.
Yeah, mine is not the 1 to 10. Mine's the 10 or 20 or 30. It's much bigger.
Yes.
And so I said, "Well," but she was very clever. Her name's Lana. She's very clever. She said, "Well, think of it this way. You don't have to fix someone else's problems. You can create problems that someone else has to fix." I said, "Yeah, that's true. Oh, I never thought of it that way." So that's what got me hooked. So that's one of the things I'm doing right now. That's what attracted me, because there was an opportunity to do something different. So right now our company is mostly working with school leaders to create visionary strategies. So a lot of professional services, but at the same time, we believe in order to make a company valuable, in order to make it so that someone will be interested in a business combination, we need products and technology. So in the background, I am working as head of products in our spare time. So that's kind of how everything fits together. So that's the story, kind of my career arc and kind of different things I'm doing. So I'm doing something totally different, because in addition to being working on a startup, I'm also on the Hillsborough School Board because of my involvement with my kids. So I learned a lot about education, which is why I ended up working on the professional service side for strategy. And then also I'm a community volunteer, so I'm on some boards. So I've kind of done a little of everything.
Wow, that's
portfolio
amazing.
approach.
Yeah, and you